I want you to imagine sitting in this really swanky, dimly lit London steakhouse.
All right, like a classic 80s power lunch spot.
Exactly, but a Friday night dinner, it is the early 1980s. The air is just thick with cigarette smoke. You hear the clinking of heavy crystal glasses everywhere.
Kind of that classic 80s excess.
Right. And there's this loud, confident laughter from all these music industry heavyweights who are just blowing through massive corporate expense accounts.
Which was completely the norm back then.
It was. So picture looking around that room, trying to spot the absolute most important person there. You would naturally scan the room for, I don't know, the record executive in the tailored suit who's picking up the tab.
I mean, that is the logical assumption for the era.
Yeah.
The executives were basically the kings of the castle. They were dictating the entire taste of the culture right from those very tables.
But the thing is, the most important person in that room, the one whose voice would literally define an entire generation, isn't even sitting at a table.
No, he's definitely not.
He is the shy, introverted, slightly overweight waiter with bad acne who is quietly refilling the water glasses.
It's just such a wild image to hold in your head.
It really is. So welcome to today's deep dive. We are unpacking an amazing source text today. It's an excerpt from music insider Kenny Denton's memoir, There Ain't No Rules in Rock and Roll.
It's a fantastic read.
Yeah, and our mission today is to track the hilarious, the humbling, and the entirely hidden machinery behind how a seemingly unremarkable young man named Georgios Panayiotou transformed into the global icon we know as George Michael.
And, the real value of this text is that it serves as this incredible masterclass in the subjectivity of talent.
How do you mean?
Well, we tend to view global superstars retroactively, right?
Yeah.
We just assume they were always these fully formed deities who simply descended from the sky with platinum records already in hand.
Like they were just born wearing the leather jacket and the shades.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Denton's memoir completely shatters that illusion of overnight success.
Yeah.
It forces us to confront the cognitive biases that blind us to the potential sitting right in front of us.
And to really understand that blindness, we first have to establish the deeply transactional, just wildly lavish world of the 1980s music business.
Oh, it was the Wild West.
Truly. So Kenny Denton was a studio insider, and he had this incredible corporate perk. He had an open account at a place called the Angus Pride Steakhouse near Wembley.
Right, just an open tab.
Yeah, and he used this account to entertain clients throwing these massive, extravagant Friday night dinners. The memoir actually highlights that he was kind of gaming the system a bit.
Oh, for sure. He'd invent fake clients early in the week just so he could take his wife, Sue, out for a free dinner.
Which is brilliant, honestly.
Hey, you got to use the perks while you have them.
Yes.
But those extravagant dinners were the actual gears of the 1980s music industry.
Right, because it wasn't about algorithms back then.
Not at all. It was an ecosystem built entirely on relationships and favors. There was no data. Through all this frequent dining, Kenny builds a deep, genuine friendship with the restaurant owner, a guy named Jack, and his wife, Leslie.
They became really tight, right?
Yeah, they become the kind of friends who just stay late, drinking well into the early morning hours, long after the restaurant has locked its doors.
Which perfectly sets the stage for this very delicate transaction. Jack, the owner, asks his good buddy Kenny for a massive favor.
The classic industry pitch.
Exactly. He explains that his son Georgios has this passion for singing and songwriting, and he asks Kenny to just, give his demo tape a professional listen.
Which is always a dangerous spot to be in with a friend.
Totally. And the kicker is, Kenny already knows Georgios. He sees him every single week. Georgios is the waiter.
Right.
And Kenny is looking at this kid through the lens of a highly visual pop landscape. He specifically notes that Georgios is overweight, deeply introverted, has bad skin, and fundamentally just does not look like a star.
And Kenny is doing what literally all of us do. He's relying on heuristics.
Just mental shortcuts.
Exactly. He is evaluating with his eyes before he ever engages his ears. I mean, you have to remember, the 1980s pop landscape was completely defined by MTV and these hypervisual aesthetics.
Right, the image was everything.
It was. If an artist didn't immediately project a specific polished visual language, industry insiders just instinctively categorize them as unviable.
It kind of feels akin to, like, your favorite bartender handing you their self-published poetry collection.
Oh, that is a perfect analogy.
No, because you want to be supportive. You genuinely like the person pouring your drinks, but your expectations are just completely on the floor.
You're already composing your polite exit strategy before you even read the first stanza.
Yes, you're just bracing for how bad it's going to be.
Because you are anchored by the context in which you know them. The human brain really resists sudden recategorization.
That makes a lot of sense.
Accepting the guy who brings you steak as a visionary artist requires spending actual cognitive energy. You have to rewrite your entire understanding of that person's identity.
So Kenny takes the tape, he pops it into the deck, and he listens. And he feels absolutely nothing.
Not a thing.
No fireworks, no lightning bolt. He concludes the vocals and the songs lack any remarkable qualities whatsoever.
He was entirely underwhelmed.
He really was. He even contrasts this in the book with the time he actually did instantly recognize raw genius.
Oh, right, the Upstate New York story.
Yeah, he talks about hearing a rough demo of Randy Van Wormer's Just When I Needed You Most at this crazy dinner party, and he just knew immediately. But with Giorgio's, the tape just sounded flat.
So now Kenny is trapped in this really difficult social position.
Yeah, what do you do?
Well, he doesn't want to crush Jack's dreams, obviously. They're friends. But he also has a professional reputation to maintain. He can't just pitch garbage to his contacts.
Right.
So he decides to produce several copies of the cassette, and he promises to share them with his A&R contacts. You know, the artists and repertoire executives whose actual mandate is to discover new talent.
So he's just passing the buck, essentially.
Basically. He passes one copy to a close friend, Sunny Ray. She was affectionately known as Sunshine.
Sunshine, yeah.
And she was the top radio promoter for Stiff Records, which was a highly influential label at the time.
So Sunny takes the tape to her boss, the guy named Dave Robinson, who is the owner of Stiff Records. And Dave's response is just the kind of brutal feedback that destroys careers.
Oh, it's devastating.
He listens and he literally declares, quote, "Even with the lights dimmed low and the volume cranked up high, it's still no cigar."
Just a complete and total dismissal. And Kenny ends up receiving similar casual rejections from every single other company he approaches.
Okay, I have to jump in here, though. I want to challenge the narrative that the industry was just blind.
Okay, go for it.
Because Dave Robinson literally owned a record label. His entire job description was to spot a diamond in the rough. So it sounds to me like these gatekeepers were just incredibly lazy, right? They're dismissing a generational talent because he was a chubby kid with a bad complexion.
And I see where you're going.
Jokesnev may have required a change of underpants.
Are we really supposed to
Paints a
believe the
picture,
guy
shared
who eventually
terror.
wrote
The
Careless
shared moment of
Whisper
dread.
And
handed
Nev
over a
immediately
genuinely
tries to get out of it,
terrible
right?
tape?
Starts
Yes.
making excuses.
We
Oh, I
absolutely
can't-
should believe the
Check
tape was
cables
bad.
or whatever.
Really?
Yes,
Totally
because you were
understandable
conflating
The
latent
narrator can't
potential
let him off the
with a
hook.
marketable product.
Okay,
Dicks
explain
or-
that.
A&R
Resolute.
executives in that
This
era
has to happen.
were not in the business of
You can
teaching
be
someone
Dixon
how to rub
sisters.
two sticks together to make a
No
fire.
choice.
So
They're
they
looking
look
for a
over
spark
at the
they could
drum kit.
immediately pour
Confirm the
gasoline on.
damage.
Ah, so they wanted
Newman-
something already catching.
Exactly. Giorgio's hadn't lived enough yet. He hadn't refined his vocal control, and most importantly, he hadn't figured out the persona required to deliver his music effectively.
That makes sense.
A raw, unconfident demo from an introverted kid simply does not translate to a record executive sitting in a boardroom.
So they weren't looking for raw talent at all. They were looking for a product that was already mostly assembled and ready to sell.
Precisely.
That actually makes Kenny's next move incredibly pragmatic, because instead of delivering Dave Robinson's soul-crushing review to the restaurant owner, Kenny chooses to feed Jack a white lie.
It was definitely the kinder option.
Yeah, he tells the father, keep going, be persistent. He even invokes this ultimate music industry myth. He reminds Jack that the Beatles were rejected by almost every label in London before finding someone who believed in them.
That white lie is basically a survival mechanism within this ecosystem.
Oh, so?
By lying, Kenny shields the father and the son from the deeply cynical reality of the executive level. He buys Giorgio's the absolute most valuable resource a developing artist can have.
Which is time.
Exactly. Time to figure out who he actually needs to be.
And that metamorphosis is exactly what happens next. So Sunny Ray Sunshine, she ends up taking a massive professional risk. She leaves the security of Stiff Records to start her own freelance business, the Sunshine Record Plugging Company.
A huge leap for her.
Huge. And Kenny goes to visit her new office near Ladbroke Grove, and she plays him one of her very first assignments. It's a track by a new band called Wham, and the song is Young Guns Go For It.
And Kenny's reaction right here is just incredibly telling.
He thinks it's just he literally listens to Wham and concludes the song is decent, but nothing remarkable.
Right over his head.
He only encourages Sunny because she's vibrating with such infectious enthusiasm. He is completely missing the cultural pulse yet again.
His ear is consistently out of tune with what the broader market is about to crave.
So the real narrative collision happens the very next Friday. Kenny and his wife are back at the Angus Pride Steakhouse, and Jack, the owner, is practically bursting at the seams.
He's so proud.
He proudly announces to the room that his son finally got a record deal, he released his debut single, changed his name to George Michael, and the band is called Wham!
I would have loved to see Kenny's face in that moment.
Right. Kenny and Sonny are utterly blindsided. The waiter from the steakhouse is the very act Sonny has just been hired to promote.
And the physical transformation detailed in the memoir is the crucial mechanism here.
It was drastic.
It really was. Georgios had shed a massive amount of weight. He received highly impressive dental work, and he was dressed by top-notch stylists. The introverted waiter had essentially vanished.
He built a pop god from scratch.
Think of the George Michael persona as a psychological Faraday cage.
Oh, I like that, a Faraday cage.
Yeah, because a Faraday cage protects whatever's inside from deadly electrical currents, right?
Right.
Well, the raw, introverted talent of Georgios Panayiotou was incredibly fragile. If he had stepped onto a stage as the shy kid from the steakhouse, the superficiality and brutal criticism of the 1980s music press would have completely electrocuted him.
They would have eaten him alive.
Exactly. The styling, the teeth, the leather jackets, the sheer projected arrogance that was the cage, it absorbed the shocks. It allowed Georgios to operate within a hostile environment safely, projecting a confidence he likely didn't intrinsically possess yet.
That completely reframes the entire concept of a stage persona for me. It isn't just marketing. It is a literal psychological containment suit.
It's armor.
Yeah, armor. And once he puts that suit on, the power dynamic in the restaurant completely shifts. The waiter is suddenly a rising star, but the relationship with Kenny actually deepens here.
Which is an interesting twist.
It is. Kenny transitions from a patron doing favors into a really vital industry mentor. One evening, Kenny and his wife sit down with Jack and spend hours explaining the absolute dark arts of music business accounting.
And this is where that insider knowledge becomes literal armor. The music industry is infamous for structural theft masquerading as standard accounting.
Yeah, the memoir specifically mentions Kenny warning Jack about royalty scams. I actually wanted to ask you about that. How did those actually work back then? How were labels legally stealing from artists who were selling millions of records?
Oh, it was wild. So two of the most common mechanisms were packaging deductions and cross-collateralization.
Okay, let's start with packaging deductions.
Right. A packaging deduction was this legacy rule from the heavy vinyl era. Labels would deduct an arbitrary percentage, often 20 to 25% of the artist's royalty rate, claiming it was to cover the cost of the physical album sleeve or the jewel case.
25% just for the cardboard.
Exactly. And they kept applying this massive deduction even when manufacturing costs plummeted. They were effectively skimming a quarter of the artist's income off the top before a single royalty check was ever cut.
That is just an invisible tax on success.
It really was. And then you have cross-collateralization.
Which sounds incredibly boring, but I bet it's malicious.
Oh, it is. Imagine you release a debut album that fails, right?
Yeah.
And that puts you $1 million in debt to the label for studio and marketing costs. Then your second album is a massive global hit that generates $10 million. With cross-collateralization, the label uses your royalties from the hit's second album to pay off the debt of the first album before they ever hand you a single check.
You're kidding?
Nope. They ensure the house always wins while the artist carries all the financial risk.
That is brutal. So Kenny lays all this out, and Jack is literally sitting at the steakhouse table, grabbing a pen and taking copious notes. And the memoir notes kind of dryly that it, quote, could have been a coincidence, but a few months later, Wham! Suspiciously changes record companies.
I don't think that was a coincidence at all.
Not a chance. Kenny's willingness to expose the mechanics of those dark arts likely saved George Michael an absolute fortune.
It is a really beautiful moment, honestly. It's the insider passing the torch to protect the outsider who has suddenly breached the castle walls.
It is. But despite this mentorship, Kenny's massive blind spot regarding George's actual art remains firmly in place.
He still doesn't get it.
He does not. Late one night, after the restaurant shuts down, Jack confidentially reveals that George wants to step out and go solo. And Jack plays Kenny and Sue an early preview of the new solo track. The song is Careless Whisper.
Arguably one of the most defining and structurally perfect pop ballads of the 20th century.
Without a doubt. But Kenny's reaction is almost comical. He admits in the book that he had consumed a few drinks and it was late, but he explicitly describes the experience as feeling like taking a ride in an elevator with a soothing melody.
Oh, no.
He literally dismisses Careless Whisper as elevator music.
Which brings us right back to the psychological mechanism of anchoring bias.
Whoa, for sure. Think about it. Have you ever been completely unable to see someone's growth because your brain is permanently stuck on the first version of them you ever met?
It happens all the time with people we knew in high school.
Exactly. You run into the kid who, ate paste in the 3rd grade, and now they are a leading neurosurgeon, and your brain simply refuses to compute the data.
It just rejects the update.
Right. Kenny's brain was anchored so deeply to the image of the chubby kid refilling his water glass that he couldn't hear a generational pop anthem staring him right in the face.
And that's exactly how anchoring bias occurs.
Yeah.
Because the first piece of information we receive about a subject becomes the absolute benchmark.
The anchor.
The anchor, yeah. All subsequent information is evaluated against that initial anchor rather than objectively on its own merits.
So Kenny's anchor was Georgios the shy waiter.
Precisely. His cognitive framework actively resisted updating the file to George Michael, the global superstar. The mental friction of reconciling those two completely different identities was just too high for his brain to process in that late-night restaurant booth.
It actually takes a literal geographic shift for the anchor to finally snap.
Yeah, he had to leave the country.
He did. Kenny is working in Austin, Texas. He is driving, turns on his car radio, and hears that the #1 song in the entire United States of America is Careless Whisper.
Hearing it in that new context changes everything.
Hearing the song thousands of miles away from the Wembley Steakhouse, completely divorced from the image of the waiter, it just shatters the cognitive dissonance. He finally admits the song is a classic.
Better late than never, I guess.
Right. He later notes that the 1987 music video for Faith completely sealed his respect. The waiter was undeniably a genuine star.
So validation from the broader culture finally provided enough external pressure to override Kenny's internal bias.
Exactly.
But even with that realization, the shadow of the past continues to complicate their dynamic.
We see that play out in a deeply poignant section of the memoir. By the late 80s, George is at the absolute pinnacle of global fame. He books time at Kenny's Chiswick-based studio in West London to record a track with a group called Boogie Box High.
Which really feels like the setup for a triumphant reunion.
It does. The mentor, the studio owner, and the superstar he knew when he was just a kid pouring water.
But the reality of managing a fabricated persona makes that reunion basically impossible.
Kenny intentionally stays away from his own studio. He hands the entire session over to his recording engineer, Ben Matthews.
That's a huge decision to avoid your own space.
It is. Kenny confesses in the text that he stayed away out of a lingering awkwardness. He says his early lack of faith, and he fully acknowledges the pun on George's hit album there made him feel guilty.
He felt bad he didn't see it early on.
Yeah, but then he drops a detail that cuts to the core of the issue. He jokes that he was terrified he had accidentally asked George to fetch him a cup of coffee.
Man, that joke really reveals the immense friction of the created persona colliding with the reality of the past.
That really highlights the tension.
Kenny knows the underlying architecture of the George Michael avatar. He watched the blueprints being drawn in that steakhouse. So being in the room with the finished, towering skyscraper feels unnatural to Kenny because he vividly remembers the empty dirt lot.
His presence threatens the illusion of the persona itself. And maintaining that illusion for decades comes with a heavy tax. To the public, the persona of George Michael is flawless, it's effortless, and perpetually confident.
But to the artist, it is a heavy psychological suit of armor that must be strapped on every single day.
The distance between Georgios the waiter and George the icon is vast. Navigating the space between those two identities requires an immense amount of emotional labor.
It has to be exhausting.
And Kenny's final observation in the text speaks directly to the exhaustion of that labor. He reflects on seeing the last few photographs of George before his untimely death.
Those final pictures are very striking.
They are. Kenny observes that those photos carried a profound sense of sadness, but accompanied by a specific kind of peace.
Peace is a good word for it.
It looked to Kenny as though George had finally, quietly reconciled with his true self, Georgios Panayotou. He had chosen to let the heavy armor of George Michael become a piece of history, allowing the man underneath to simply breathe.
That's a melancholic but vital full-circle moment. The armor was absolutely necessary to survive the battlefield of the 1980s music industry.
It kept him alive, creatively.
It did. It allowed a shy kid to conquer the globe. But battles eventually end. And recognizing when it is safe to take the armor off is its own kind of victory.
When we pull all these threads together, the mechanics of success become incredibly clear. Raw talent is the prerequisite. but it is never enough on its own.
Never.
Success requires navigating complex ecosystems, relying on mentors like Kenny to decode the dark arts of the industry, and crucially, having the willingness to build whatever psychological armor is necessary to survive the arena.
The environment and the execution dictate the outcome just as much as the raw material. You can't separate them.
Which leaves us with a final, completely counterintuitive thought from Kenny Denton's text to mull over. Towards the end of the excerpt, Kenny explicitly notes that looking back, he is profoundly glad that Dave Robinson and all his other A&R contacts rejected that early, awkward demo tape.
Which sounds crazy, but if Stiff Records had accepted that raw tape, the outcome would have been vastly different.
The label would have likely churned Giorgio's out as a mid-tier, mismanaged act, and then discarded him when the first single failed.
They wouldn't have known what to do with it.
Exactly. Because of that rejection, Giorgio's was forced back to the drawing board. It bought him the time to meet the visionary manager Simon Napier-Bell, who helped mastermind the Wham explosion.
If Dave Robinson had said yes, the George Michael persona might literally never have been created.
The rejection was the necessary catalyst for the reinvention. It prevented him from entering the machine before he had built his armor.
It's such a powerful reframe.
It is. So think about a time you faced a completely crushing rejection, a job you were desperate to get, maybe a creative project that was dismissed by people you respected, or a relationship that abruptly ended.
We all have those moments.
We do. Could that brutal no actually have been the universe protecting you? Protecting you from getting exactly what you wanted, but from the wrong people at the wrong time before you were truly ready to handle it.
We constantly view rejection as a door slamming shut, but often it is just the architect forcing you to build a stronger foundation.
Exactly. So the next time you find yourself sitting in a restaurant, look closely at the person refilling your water glass. They might just be figuring out how to build the armor they need to change the world.
I love that.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the obvious, and we'll see you next time.